to the Innerfire podcast. We are glad you're with us today. We are thankful to have Larry Warren with us today. Larry is the founder and Chief Stewardship Officer and Chief Storyteller for Leadership International. He's also was a founder and led African leadership for many years. He's been in missions for over 40 years in one way or another. And we're just going to talk to him about how God has worked in his own life and what he's seen God do in missions over those last 40 years. I know you're going to enjoy the conversation because Larry is the chief storyteller. So, Larry, welcome to the Innerfire podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We appreciate you taking the time, sit down and talk with us. I know you got a lot going on. And so just looking forward to hearing your personal story and then hearing some of what you have seen God do in other people's lives through the work that you've done. What we're trying to do here is get people to understand that God's just not somebody they can visit with on Sunday morning at church, but He works continually in our lives.
Yeah.
We should be engaged with Him 24/7.
Yeah.
So anyway, tell us a little bit about your background, maybe your upbringing, where you're from, and just your spiritual journey.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a long spiritual journey. I mean, I'm old, but
we hit the highlights.
Yeah, we'll hit the highlights. We'll give you the. I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and my parents were strong Christians, and my dad was an elder in his church, and he was in business until he was in his early 40s, and my mother was always involved in the church, and so I'm very thankful for that. That's played a pivotal role in my whole spiritual development. I remember when I was 11, my dad called the family together. I have two other brothers, and he said, I'm not going to be able to see you much except on the weekends for the next few years.
Wow.
And he said, the reason is because I'm going to go to college. And he was 42, and he'd been in accounting for 20 years. And he said, and then after college, we're moving. I'm going to seminary. And so, I was 11 years old. I didn't think that much about it.
Right.
And but Dad continued to work, and every day after work, he drove out to UNC Charlotte, worked on his degree, and then he'd study at night, and we kind of just saw him on the weekends. And then a couple years later, we moved to Wake Forest. He went to Southeastern Baptist Seminary, and but looking back on it, that was so significant for me to see him make a career change, and also because he had a business background, it was reflected in the way he was a pastor. He used to say, unfortunately, we don't hear enough sermons about our work.
Right.
And that's what we all do 40, 50 hours a week.
That's right.
So he's always asking and trying to answer the questions, how do we integrate our faith into our work, but first in our own personal life and our own family. So anyway, I grew up in Charlotte, and then we moved to Wake Forest, and then we were there a couple of years, and then the next 25 years, my dad pastored small churches in Virginia and North Carolina.
That's interesting to me, and just what your dad said, because I am a business owner myself. I've been a pastor, and I'm a part of C12, which is all about using our business for ministry.
Yes.
And it is really something that's not talked about a lot. One of the guys that I meet with regularly, we were talking just this week about how, for some reason in our minds, we think work and ministry, and we divide those up into two different buckets.
Yes.
But work, we all have to pay the bills, and so that money's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Most of us, if we're not in full-time ministry, do have a job. Hopefully we do.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we stop doing ministry just because we're at a job. Right? And so hopefully we can break that mindset down. I would have loved to have been able to sit down and talk to your dad about that.
Yeah. Well, I got to a lot, and I'll give you one quote of his.
Okay.
Because people, when he left business, they said, "Oh, so you're going to go into full-time ministry?" And he used to say, "Well, I didn't know there was any part-time work available," is what he said.
Right.
Part-time, and they would be like, "What?" He said, "No, there's an unbiblical separation between the kind of secular and sacred." And so we need to learn how to do banking Christianly, how to do real estate Christianly, how to do nursing Christianly, because God has called us all, he would say, to full-time ministry.
Amen.
It's just, where's your location? And yeah, so he was a great influence, and my mother too. We used to joke later, because my older brother became a pastor, and reflecting on the churches they had, Dad was an excellent preacher. But my mother was an excellent pastor. She was the relational one.
I understand that.
And, yeah, you understand that dynamic. Yeah. So yeah, I'm very thankful for them, and that had a lot to do with the direction I went. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
So, did you come to know the Lord then at an early age, having that strong foundation, or what did your personal spiritual journey look like?
I did. My dad was actually an elder in a Presbyterian church when he was in business. And we moved to a neighborhood where it was across town to his church, and he was really growing spiritually. And there's a little Baptist church a block away. So we started going there on Sunday nights because his church didn't have a Sunday night service. Then we found the pastor was our next backdoor neighbor. And so anyway.
I didn't know Presbyterians and Baptists would mix like that.
Well, yeah, that's part of the journey, which is why our ministry is what we call trans-denominational.
That's great.
It's not non-denominational. There are people, probably 50 different denominations.
Right.
But we think when people get together with a common unity around the basics, the fundamental things they agree on, great things happen. Without spending so much time, well, yeah, we don't agree on a lot. But anyway, when I was 9 years old, after some conversation with my parents, they said, I think you need to go talk to Mr. Moore. That was the pastor of the Baptist church. And I remember climbing over the fence and going to his house.
Wow.
And so that's when I would say I consciously became a Christian, and I was baptized after that. And I wish I could say, and then I've been faithfully in ministry the rest of my life, but that's not the rest of the story.
Sure.
But that is the foundation.
Right.
And yeah. So
you grew up from there. Teenage years, pretty involved in spiritual things. College. What did all that look like for you?
Well, and not so much. I was pretty much. It was difficult for, you can imagine. I don't know if you moved around a lot, but my dad moved 2 or 3 times. From Charlotte to Wake Forest, into 2 different churches while I was in high school, and so that was difficult for a teenager.
Sure.
And I began to resent the moving and what was happening in my life. I couldn't articulate it that well then, but it really turned me against some of the, not against Christ, but against my dad's journey. And so, yeah, I really distanced myself. And I remember my dad saying when I went off to college, he said, your mother and I have spent 18 years teaching you what we think is right and wrong, what we think are the important Christian values, and you'll spend the rest of your life deciding what do you believe.
Right.
I think you know what we believe.
Right.
And unfortunately, when I got to college, within a couple of years, most of the things I'd been told, don't do this, I did. And
not an uncommon experience.
No, it's not uncommon.
I mean, college is an age where people are testing those belief systems that their parents have ingrained to them. Yeah,
and it's not uncommon, but it is embarrassing.
Yeah.
So then early on, my older brother was in seminary. Like I said, my dad's a Baptist pastor, but my older brother was going to seminary at a Presbyterian seminary.
Okay, so your dad was a Baptist? Was he?
Yeah.
You went to a Presbyterian church originally, but your dad became a Baptist minister.
Yeah, because the neighbor had so much influence on him. And my dad said, I think the Lord's called me to be a pastor. He said, then this is the path I'd suggest.
Gotcha. Okay.
We joined the Baptist church. He went to Baptist seminary. Then my brother, who he was in Virginia. He played basketball at Virginia Tech, and we were all kind of surprised when his senior year he comes home and tells Dad, I think I'm going to go to seminary. And I've been looking at different schools, and I've been looking at some Baptist schools and some Presbyterian schools. This may not be the case now, but it's a pretty funny statement. He said, so Dad, what do you think? Which seminary should I go to? And he said, well, Ed, if you have a strong theological reason to be Baptist or Presbyterian, then that's what you should go with. If you don't, be a Presbyterian, they'll pay you more.
We'll knock on the Baptist.
Oh yeah, no, that's right. I don't know that that's the case. If that was just my own father's experience.
That was your dad's experience with
and his
whether that
experience
was
in bookkeeping. Yeah. But anyway, Dad also told us all when he was telling us, we're going to figure out our own faith the rest of our life. He said, I went to college. I think it was good for me. I hope you'll go too. Mm-hmm. And I believe the Lord will provide somehow, but it won't be a check from me. So all three of us paid our way through college, and my older brother had sold books door to door, and helped pay his way through seminary. Mm-hmm. So after my first year of college, I'd saved enough in high school to pay for 1 year, and then I followed my brother's footsteps, and so I spent the next, actually 10 years with a door-to-door book selling company. I paid my way through college, and that's a dangerous combination when you get a young person with too much money. So pretty much from that, going into detail to save time, about 19 to 27, I would say I was a nominal Christian. I went to church from time to time, and but in 1979, by then I had finished college and I had gone to work with the book selling company. They're based here in Nashville, so I moved here to be a sales manager. Mm-hmm. And I was riding in town with another single guy, and we decided we're going to go to dinner and go to a movie. And we hear on the radio that Billy Graham is going to be at the Vanderbilt Stadium that night. And we're pulling into a restaurant right down there. It used to be called Houston's. I don't know what it's called now.
Right.
And
I've heard other people speak of that.
My friend says, hey, Billy Graham's over there. And I said, yeah, he went to high school with my father in Charlotte. There's another guy from Charlotte who's been pretty successful. That was my mentality.
Right.
And he said, well, why don't we go hear him? I said, well, I thought you were Jewish. And he said, well, I'm about as Jewish as you are Christian, which tells you I didn't have much testimony.
Right.
So long story short, we left our car right there at the restaurant. He said, let's go to the show first and then go to dinner. That was our attitude going in.
Right.
But when Billy Graham preached that night, as he always preaches a salvation message, the focus was on lordship. Who's the ruler of your life? Who's the Lord? And he went through the New Testament passages about Lord and Savior, Lord and Savior. He's not just your Savior.
Right.
He's your Lord. Who's the ruler of your life? And I knew, it's me. And so as we walked out, my friend said, man, you wanted to go forward, didn't you? And I said, yeah, and I will tomorrow night. And I did.
Oh, wow.
And so there was a huge shift. I still believe, this is not a theological debate, but I believe I came to Christ as a child. Spent a lot of unnecessary, painful years in the wilderness.
Right.
And then the Lord, in His mercy, brought me back with an understanding that He wanted to be the main thing.
Right. And
so from then on, I didn't say, okay, now I'm going to full-time ministry. I was still very influenced by my dad. And so I spent 2 more years at the book company, sharing my faith on a regular basis, trying to have some influence in the place where I'd had 8 years of relationships. Right. And then...
Before you finish that, I want to ask you a question about those roughly 8 years where you were, in your words, a nominal Christian.
Yeah.
For other people that are in a situation like that, maybe young people are in college that really don't understand the lordship of Christ. They're not really living that way. Yeah. What would you tell them about that 8 years of your life, maybe that might influence something that they need to be doing different now?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I've had a lot of these discussions. I have 4 sons, and so we talked a lot about that. And the first thing I say is, really be careful who you choose to spend your time with, because that will influence your thinking, and you also have an opportunity to encourage or discourage them. So first, that was one of my biggest mistakes. I'm at a big university, and I wasn't intentionally involved. I didn't seek out the campus groups or church groups that would give me the fellowship. We all need fellowship. and university fellowships everywhere. So choose a healthy place.
Right.
That's what I'd say. Make healthy choices about relationships. And second, be consistent with, and I use the word health because it seems to resonate more with the next generation. And I read it in talking about God and Jesus all the time. If you'll to be healthy, you have to be in fellowship, but you also need to be in the Word, and you need to be doing the things that got you here.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that's the things that I wish I'd done differently.
Requires some intentionality. You can't just show up at college or leave home or even go into the workplace and just willy-nilly go. I mean, there's going to have to be some intention to have a morning Bible study, a devotion time, to get involved with a group. All these things require us to make conscious decisions.
Yes.
But they do bear fruit in our life if we'll do those.
They do, and they create a community that it doesn't mean you're still going to have temptation, but it minimizes it so much if you're with people that are like-minded.
Right.
And the world has a culture that'll sweep you away unless you are intentional.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're going to come back to that because probably in a little while, when we get more into the mission stuff, we're going to talk about missional friendship and making friends with unbelievers. And so it'd be interesting. Maybe we just do it. We'll get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
Okay. It is important in missions to make friends, to engage unbelievers.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So how do we do that without getting sucked in with the unbelievers? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So the same situation you're just talking about. You want to surround yourself with like-minded people, but you can't put yourself in a bubble and be effective. What do you think about that, or what kind of wisdom you got on that one?
Well, probably not as much as this broadcast deserves, but I will say, we're called to be salt and light. We're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to go, and we need to go with, as Paul says in Ephesians, by putting on the whole armor and being alert. Mm-hmm. But I believe that we can respectfully go into relationships. My experience is that people want authentic relationships.
Amen.
And so if we go in and we're honest and authentic and actually step into something, not on the first visit, but that's what some people call friendship evangelism. Mm-hmm. There are more people that come to Christ through friends than through crusades or radio.
Right.
And so if we can just make friends, then opportunities to actually specifically share the gospel, in my opinion, will come. Mm-hmm. And to answer your question about without being overly influenced by them, that is a very individual friendship kind of question. There's a friend in town here that I spent several months walking with. He's smarter than me, and he's a well-read, intentional atheist. But I wanted to have that time with him.
Sure.
And there's no fruit yet, but it's not over yet.
Right.
But I have to sometimes say, I need to take a break. I don't have to tell him I need to take a break, but I'm telling myself.
Right.
And I think that I have another friend that has a pretty wild lifestyle, and so I have to be careful that to say, I want to meet with you. But no, I'd rather not meet in this place.
Right.
Or why don't we just meet for lunch? These long dinners in crazy places are not. They're discouraging.
They're not healthy.
They're not healthy. We can come back to the whole health thing. Exactly. I'd just say, keep checking your health meter, your spiritual health.
Right.
And then finally, I'd say, the Holy Spirit is the real evangelist. So it's your job to go. Mm-hmm. It's not your job to bring anybody to Christ. That's what God's going to do. But He, for some reason, has given us the privilege to be the ones that take the message. Mm-hmm. So go without putting pressure on yourself about expectations. Because if you really are their friend, and you speak the truth, it'll set them free.
Right. I really like what you said about being authentic, because I think you just have to let people know right up front, hey, I want to have a relationship here, but there are some, I've got some lines that I don't do.
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not telling you that we can't be friends if you don't come back
Yes.
up over to my side of the
Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
You know, but that's my own personal conviction about it. What I have found is people respect that.
Me too. Me too.
Because, you know, for me personally, you know, I confronted this when I went in the Air Force. I went to college on Air Force scholarship. Most military places are a little on the wild side from a you know, a social aspect,
yes.
right? But you know, early on, thankfully, I drew those lines and said, you know, I'm not going to I'm not going to participate in these things.
Yeah.
And people respected that.
They do.
I still had great friends there.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we kind of completely disrupted your story.
Well, that's all right.
I want to circle back to it and pick back up after the Billy Graham crusade. You really dedicated your life back to Christ.
Yes.
Started being a lot more out there with your relationships at work. Where'd you go from there?
Well, after pretty soon after the Billy Graham crusade, as I looked at my life and made plans, I thought, I don't think I want to stay in this in business, but definitely not with this company. But I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, you know, and so I applied to law school and I got in, and but I didn't know any Christian lawyers, and so I started asking around in this church, and they sent me to a guy here in Nashville named Jack Thompson, and he's with the Lord now, but he said, we talked. The short story is, he said, while we're talking, would you just pick up that telephone book over there? And I said, okay. And so he said, well, he's talking and asked me questions. And he said, go to the lawyers. He said, look how many there are. And finally said, listen, Larry, if you want to be a Christian lawyer, great. There aren't that many of us. But he said, I've counted. There are more than 500 lawyers in Nashville.
Wow.
You think we need another one? He said, first, don't leave your company now. You've got 8 years of relationship. Go back there until the people there know who you are, but mainly who Jesus is. That was a great word, to not just leave those relationships. And so it was difficult years, but I learned so much. And then he said, if you still want to go to law school, then go ahead. There's not, you know, and so.
What if we all took that approach, and we went to work and we said, you know, I might be here the rest of my career. I might be here another 5 years, but I think I'll at least be here until everybody here knows about Jesus.
That's what he challenged me.
That'd be a pretty amazing thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it was a great. You know, I didn't know much, and also within the next year, my wife had come to Christ in college, and we decided to get married. And so, you know, by the time the 2 years were up that I felt like I really needed to give, I felt like, you know, that the people that I had those relationships with, they knew what I was about.
Right.
And my wife and I had started studying the scripture ourselves, and we found that I wasn't really interested in law anymore. The only thing I really wanted to know, I was jealous of my brother and my father with the seminary training.
Right.
And I thought, I don't want to sit in the pew for the next 40 years to know what I could probably go learn in a year if I just studied it.
Short circuit this thing a little bit.
So that's what we did. We left the company and went to grad school to study our faith.
Very good. Where'd you go?
We went to this, you know, you didn't know a lot about me, but you're going to hear some strange stories. I'm living in Nashville, okay? This is the buckle of the Bible Belt.
Right,
This is, you know, and I was serious about my faith, but I still thought, I didn't want to be a pastor, okay? I really didn't. I thought the mission field is actually the business field. That's where most non-believers are.
Right.
Most people come to church, they're already believers, so why should I be a pastor?
Right.
And plus, you know, I had made some money, and I liked it. And as my dad said, you know, there's nothing wrong with being poor, but if you have a choice. So, you know, so I thought, my pastor and I, a guy named Scotty Smith, who's still in Nashville, he and I had a couple of meetings, and he said, well, it sounds to me like what you'd like to do is go to seminary, but you'd rather go to a seminary where you're not trained how to preach a sermon, but how to integrate your faith into your life and work. I said, right. Is there such a place? He said, actually, there are a couple of them. And he told us about Regent University in Vancouver, Canada. And then he said Fuller Seminary in California has a degree in called Ministry of the Laity. So my wife and I, we flew to Vancouver. Then we went to L.A. And at both those places, they said, we really get what you're saying. It's a big need. And we've actually started a graduate school in Berkeley, California. And rather than coming to Fuller or to Regent, both of them said, you should go to Berkeley.
Wow.
And you can imagine when
Berkeley, California is not normally the place you think about going to get in a seminary degree.
No, it's like, but you know what? In Berkeley, California is the largest theological seminary in the world.
Really?
There are 10 seminaries in the San Francisco Bay Area, and instead of having 10 different seminaries, they put them all together.
Oh, wow.
It's called the Graduate Theological Union, and that's where Mary and I studied.
Interesting.
But it was, the great thing for us was, talking about sharing your faith with non-believers. In Nashville, people just assume you're a Christian, and they don't even ask you you're a Christian. Where do you go to church?
All right.
In Berkeley, if you say you're a Christian, they say, what for? So that going to parties was my first apologetics. So it was a great experience for us.
Very good. Very good. Okay, so how long were you there?
Well, it was a 1-year program, and my wife and I were both full-time studying our faith, and it was an exciting time, and it was a great program. But 6 months into it, I told you my father and my brother were both pastors. I was told to step out of class and take a phone call, and my father said, your brother Ed has been in a terrible accident, and it doesn't look like he's going to survive. So my older brother, who was actually my best friend and kind of my hero, he had just gotten his doctorate in theology and was pastor in First Presbyterian Church of Roanoke, Virginia, and had a wife and 2 kids, and he'd been a great athlete and mentor to me. He was gone, and so here I am studying my faith, and so that was not only a terrible time, but we dropped out of school, and I came back to spend time with his wife, and I was really, I didn't grieve well,
Something like that will shake you.
Yeah, it really did, and it shook my faith. It didn't. Thank God, the school that I was attending, when Mary and I came back for about a month, and we came back and said, we're not going to stay here, and I just can't be studying my faith. I'm too depressed, frankly. And God used the president of that school, a man named Dr. Bill Durnis, and he says, I really think I want to encourage you to stay here a while. Maybe don't go back to class. In fact, you and Mary could just move in our house. Wow. And he told me that he had lost his sister when he was in college. He was 20 and she was 22, and she was killed in an auto accident. Wow. So here's a man that could relate. Sure. And he also was a brilliant theologian. And he said, the second thing is, I know you got a sales background, and he said, we need somebody to raise money for our school. He said, do you believe in what we're doing? I said, yeah, but I can't do it now. He said, fine. So I went to work for the school as a dropout.
Well, I mean, that's just amazing how God weaves those things.
Yes.
Putting you there with him with similar experience, and him being willing to open his home like that is pretty amazing. Yeah, it was great. So we actually stayed there for 2 years. Wow. And then and we both did actually get a degree. We got a letter in the mail like 9 years later and said, there's a statute of limitations on getting this degree. Right. And so you have to finish in 10 years. And so we did. Yeah. So we stayed a couple more years in California, and then we moved back here to Nashville, basically because my wife got a job here. Mary's a therapist, and she's working with the Sumner County Mental Health Center. Okay. I didn't know what I'd do, but we both had determined it's time to leave, and so we came back here.
and started the next chapter.
Next chapter.
Yeah.
Well, what did that look like? What was that next chapter?
Well, that was really the beginning of overseas missions for me.
Okay.
We had learned a lot, and so we were trying to get in a situation where we could really live out our faith with this new information. And we went back to our same church, but I joined a friend of mine that needed a sales trainer, and so I was back in business, and I thought, this is it. This is what we were prepared for. Well, that was in the early 80s, and about 84, 85 in there, and Mary and I started going to a Sunday school class, actually a mission Sunday school class, which I encourage any church. If you don't have a Sunday school class on missions, you're missing a great opportunity. And this same lawyer, Jack Thompson, was the one who facilitated it.
Oh, okay.
And he didn't...
Kind of come full circle there.
Yeah, and so we're in his class, and he would invite missionaries or other people, the local ministries, to come in and speak. And one of them had to say, why don't you take a Bible dictionary, you can Google it now, what does the Bible say about the poor? And I went home that Sunday afternoon, and I was shocked to see 800 references to the poor. The spiritually poor, the materially poor, and I didn't read them all, but I read about 100 of them. And when I got to Matthew 25, when Jesus says he's coming back, and when he does, he's going to separate the sheep from the goats, the righteous from the unrighteous. And when he says to the righteous, come in and enjoy your inheritance, he identified them by who they were ministering to. The hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the strangers, the sick, and those in prison.
Right.
And I sat there that afternoon and thought, I'm in a good church. I'm singing in the choir. I'm even working with the youth. But I was not in a intentional ministry relationship with anybody in any of those 6 groups. And I just said, Father, forgive me. I mean, I thought I learned something in grad school, but
we never quit learning, do we?
Oh my gosh. And so that was the beginning of our ministry. I started working in volunteering in inner city Nashville. And a fellow I knew from college was an evangelist in North Carolina, and I'd been supporting him financially. And then he started doing stuff internationally, and he got involved in Haiti, and he called me, and he thought I had more money than I did. I think he forgot I'd taken a couple-year break, but he asked me for a gift. He said he was trying to build a medical clinic in Haiti. And so I sent him a check, and I have used this as a fundraising technique since then, but he called me back and he said, thank you for your gift. What do you want me to do with it? I said, well, put it toward that clinic. And he said, well, can I do anything I want to with it? And I was like, yeah, JL, I trust you. He said, okay, well, the first thing I want to do is I want to buy you a plane ticket to Haiti. Because I don't think you understand how serious this is.
Wow.
Well, then
I got your attention, didn't it?
Boy. And so that's another long story, but the short story is I went. He said, it's just a long weekend. You can go down Friday or be back on Monday. It's not that far to Haiti.
Right.
And but what we didn't know was the weekend we got there was the year the U.S. invaded and took their dictator out, and they closed the airport, and we ended up being there for 10 days.
Oh wow.
But I could tell a lot of stories about what happened there. But then I started raising money to build that clinic. That was my first fundraising for missions.
You became actively involved,
Very.
not just giving to it, but actively involved.
Exactly.
Because you had seen it firsthand.
Exactly, and I still had a day job. I was still managing with this other company, but my spare time was engaging other people. I took, in the next 3 years, I probably took 20 trips to Haiti. Did the same thing with other businessmen that he'd done with me. And then in 1986, I was sitting in the airport in Atlanta. And between 84 and 86, the older people watching this will remember, like Ukraine is on TV every night now, okay?
Right.
Well, it was Ethiopia. There was a drought.
Right.
And there was a famine. And it was just overwhelming. 1 million people died between 84 and 86 of starvation in Ethiopia. And I was sitting in the Atlanta airport looking at the Atlanta Constitution. There's a whole section in there of pictures. And I just put it down and said, Lord, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to do anything about this? and it was so clear. All I heard was hungry, thirsty, naked, strangers, sick, and those in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay. So I did what I've done before. I started writing checks to a ministry, and it was actually because of the influence of Billy Graham ministry on our life. I started sending my Samaritan's Purse because they were doing relief.
Right.
And then, but as a businessman, I had a lot of questions. You know, I didn't. I trusted my friend JL. I didn't distrust them, but I wanted to know that the people are really hearing the gospel and how the money's being used. So I'd ask questions. The bigger the check I wrote, the more I asked.
That's
Due diligence.
Return on investment.
That's
right?
it.
I mean,
That's
you're looking for, is that money doing what I think it's doing? Give me some evidence that I'm getting something.
Exactly. Yeah. So you get it. And so finally, one of the guys said, Mr. Warren, sound like you're pretty concerned about exactly how the money's spent. And I said, yeah. And I don't think I'm asking unreasonable questions. They said, we don't think so either. Why don't you go to Ethiopia with us? And you can audit the books if you want to. You can see the distribution. And I thought, gosh, they got me again, just like Haiti. You know?
You got to stop asking so many questions.
I got to stop asking so many questions. That's my takeaway for the day. Yeah.
I'm learning some lessons here. I'm going to quit asking so many questions.
Yeah. So anyway, that's how.
I'm almost scared to ask you another question.
Okay, great. This is got you just where I want you.
Exactly.
Now the Lord really used that because, and it used all these things, and thank God I can still laugh about them because they were scary and sad situations. But 3 months later, I was in Ethiopia with Franklin Graham and with a well-known agriculturalist. It was so great because this farmer was so practical, but so deep in the Word. And so that was really my beginning into full-time ministry.
Well, I want to stop there and ask you a question because I suspect many Christians have been in the situation where they were exactly like you were in the airport in Atlanta. You're looking at all these bad situations.
Yeah.
And you're basically saying, I mean, I've done it with Ukraine right now. You know, I see these Ukrainian people fleeing, and I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? I mean, obviously you wrote a check. That's what, I was thinking, I need to write a check to somebody who's supporting these Ukrainian folks. I mean, what would you tell the people who are asking themselves that question? What do I need to do here?
Yeah. Well, I was in a Bible study yesterday morning, and that's exactly how it ended. Somebody just said, hey, what are we supposed to do about the situation in Ukraine? And that's the question we were asking 40 years ago in Ethiopia.
Right.
And I said, we always pray. That's the most important response because we work with the sovereign Lord. And he there's no shortage of what he can do. But after prayer and all the kind of prayers we could talk about, praying for that the war ends or that the people are protected or, all the political things, then I think, for me, I now think, is there something I could go and do? That's what I think in the Western culture, we usually think check second, give. And I did too. I'm telling you, that's what I did.
Sure.
And so if there's a way that you could go and actually do something, use your expertise, say whether it's technology or it's healthcare. My partner in ministry, he's a logistics expert, and so he used that. He volunteered to the Haiti earthquake because he could manage the distribution of supplies.
Right.
And that's actually where he met his wife because she was a Christian nurse from Wales, and she just took some time off of work and went down there to, help people medically. So I think if you can do, I think we need to ask that question. But then, the third one is give, and so everybody can pray and give, and some of us, more of us, I believe, could actually go and use the expertise of service.
Right.
So that's what I'd say now.
Well, and I think that's important because, when I look down the road at what we're trying to accomplish, as a ministry.
Yeah.
Right. We're trying to get people to live out their faith.
Yes.
And there's an action part of that.
That's right.
And, when I look down the road, I think if we could be successful, because honestly on social media right now, there's a big pushback of, don't send me your thoughts and prayers, because that's what we're known for, right? We're just known for saying, we're sending you good thoughts and prayers. Maybe we're known occasionally for writing a check. I think too often we're viewed as being a little tight with our money, although I think there are a lot of great Christian people that do give a lot.
There are.
But that doing part, I think, is where we're coming up short. I think if we could become better doers, just like what you're talking about, we could change how this culture even views Christianity.
Yes.
Right, and that's what I would really like to see in the long term with people living out their faith. And I know it's difficult sometimes to figure out exactly what that doing part is in a situation like Ukraine, but I think if we're looking for it, maybe we're a little too tight with our vacation. Maybe our weekends are a little too important to us to get involved in some of these. And unfortunately, for most of us, we're a lot more willing to sacrifice a little bit of money than we are time.
Yes.
But it takes time to do.
Yes.
So anyway, that's a good word, and hopefully people that are asking that question will take something from that. Yeah.
And that's exactly where we are today with Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't talked much about our ministry. I can do it now or later, but that is like I said, that was just yesterday.
Right.
Some people were asking me, what can we do?
Right.
Let's keep praying. It's difficult to go, but you can.
Right.
I was on a conversation today, and we've just planned a team to go to Romania. And because we can serve the refugees,
right? Exactly. Yes.
And so money's coming in to serve refugees that way. But there are also people with certain expertise.
Mm-hmm.
If we had somebody that has a background in trauma counseling, that would be a tremendous thing for the churches in Poland and Romania and Moldova, because they're overwhelmed. The people are traumatized.
Oh,
I could go down a long list, but there are people that can go and do something.
Right.
And it's all about the body of Christ, exercising your gifts. And a lot of people, giving is their gift.
Right.
Yeah. So many prayer warriors. So
right.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, we definitely want to get into your specific mission work, Leadership International. I think we still got some time, so I want to pick back up your story again, and you started going to Haiti.
Yeah.
You got involved in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
You got invited down to see firsthand what was going on.
Yeah.
Pick it up from there, and how did that turn into full-time mission?
Well, the way it happened was on that trip, the farmer that went with us, his name's Art Van Wingerden, is a Dutch guy, and it's a great story of his family. He came here. He told me after World War II, and he's had a one wife, 3 children, and $8 US. And 40 years later, his family has the largest network of greenhouses in the United States.
Wow. And
when he took me to one of them, he said, "What do you see over there?" And I said, "A greenhouse." He said, "No, Larry, that's a generator." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It's a generator for the kingdom. It generates money to help people all around the world." And then I go because he said, "I'm not a preacher, but I know a lot about growing food." And so he had started a ministry called Double Harvest, how to help people grow more food on less water. And he was on this trip with me in Franklin to start. He had put together what he called a small plot drip irrigation system. Drip irrigation's all over the world. But what he says, how could we help these small farmers just right there with a little bit of the rain that they can catch coming off the roof of their house and put in a bucket, grow more food on less water? So the way I got into full-time ministry was at the end of that trip, the 3 of us sat down and Franklin said, "I'm convinced this drip irrigation can change a lot of parts of Africa, not just Ethiopia." By then we're kind of into more development. A lot of the relief was done. So he said, "We're going to start a project with Samaritan's Purse, and so we'll provide the money. And Art says, and I'll provide the technology. I can get a lot of this stuff donated, and seed and buckets and drip lines, and we're sitting there, and then they both
they looked at you.
Exactly.
What you gonna provide?
Yeah,
Larry?
that's exactly what they. That Art says. So what are you going to do, Warren? And before I could answer it, Franklin said, "Oh, you're going to run it. You're going to be in charge of it. So what we need is you." I said, "So you're going to give money and you're going to give supplies and I'm going to give all my time?" And they were like, both of them, "Yeah, that would work." And that's what I did for the next several years. And,
wow.
and so we ended up distributing drip irrigation systems to over 50 countries around the world.
Wow.
And 6 years into it, I had found that the most effective way, at least for us to do development, was through local churches. And so you look for what I call local intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
You want mature believers, but you also want people to know the community, and because they know who really needs something and who doesn't.
Right.
But also because of my background, I was very interested in the local churches. So I got to go and visit churches in a lot of countries in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And I was shocked. Even though there's a deep spirituality of people that have learned a level of contentment with almost nothing, whereas we in the West, it's not that. Yeah, we got a lot of stuff, but my conclusion was our stuff's got us.
Mm.
And so that contentment that they had with so little, it was very attractive.
Mm.
But frankly, the teaching was really from crazy to heretical.
Mm.
And I realized, well, no wonder. They haven't had any training. Most pastors, they say now there are more than 3 million people leading churches around the world that have never had any formal theological training.
Mm.
So I decided, and fortunately the Lord, like you said, how He brings people. A group came to us out of Malawi that wanted to take over the drip irrigation.
Mm.
And
open another door for you to do something
I was like,
else.
praise the Lord, but and they were farmers. They're
right.
agricultural missionaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so they took that, and at that time, Mary and I had just decided if we're going to do this full time. I mean, we had been doing it full time, but this is going to be our career.
Right.
I thought going back and forth, which I'd done by then for 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was missing a lot. And
right.
I said,
family was here in the States.
Yeah,
you were traveling back and forth to Ethiopia and other places.
Yeah, and so I said, for me to go to the next level of understanding in my career, we need to live in Africa. So we moved to Kenya, and while we were doing that transition out of the drip irrigation, I started volunteering at a local church and asked them if we could start some training for the men in the biggest slum in East Africa is called Kibera. And I was working with this Kibera Africa Inland Church. And they already had a class for people in the community that would never get to go to Bible college.
Right.
They couldn't afford it. And that's when I started thinking, this is what I want to do. If I can train church leaders, but also fund some relief and development projects in the same communities. That's my experience, that's my passion, and that's where it started in 92 when our family was living in Kenya.
Right. So that was with, so you founded then Africa International?
Yeah, well actually what happened, after Franklin, the guy that took me to Haiti, his name is Dr. J.O. Williams,
okay,
and he basically was my mentor for the last 30 years of his life. He died a few years ago. But I joined his ministry. Okay. And it's now called Feed the Hunger. Okay. And so he was feeding people spiritually, tremendous evangelist. And his son now runs a ministry, and they send, I don't know how many containers around the world of food to feed people physically. Right. But anyway, I went to work with him from 86 to 99. So I had 15 years with him, and I was on loan to Samaritan's Purse. Oh, okay. and for some of those years. And so, yeah, in 92, I was still with JL, and we lived there for just a few months. And then we planned to stay there long term, but my father got sick. We came home, and he died that year. Mm. And by then, I'd gotten to know the people who were doing that first training center in Kenya.
Right.
And found that the curriculum was written by a pastor named Dr. Dennis Mock, and he was an associate pastor at First Baptist Church in Atlanta with Stanley. Mm-hmm. And so when I came home and spent time with my dad, I started communicating with Dr. Mock and went to see him and found out about his ministry. And he said, "Well, we got two classes in Kenya and one in the Philippines." And I was waiting to find out where. I said, "That's it?" He said, "Yeah, I just wrote it a couple years ago." I said, "Man, this needs to go all over the world." I said, "There's a worldwide need for this to train church leaders who don't have access to theological training." And he said, "Well, I believe it was my job to write it. Why don't you take it around the world?" And I'm like, wow,
Right.
And so by God's grace, that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years.
Right.
From 92 to now. And actually with 3 different ministries.
Right.
There with JL, and then then when we left here in 93, after my father passed away, we moved to South Africa. Because apartheid laws had just changed. And until then, if you weren't white, you couldn't go to Bible college. Well, now it was opened up. Mm-hmm. And so my wife and I, we had 2 boys by then, we moved to South Africa, and we stayed there for the next 5 years. And started Bible training centers. And we also got involved in relief and development area efforts in South Africa. Mm-hmm. So then we came back here in 99, and that's when JL and I realized, and I thank God for this. We're all going to have, we all have succession plans or transition plans, because it's going to happen whether you plan it or not.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And JL, I was already thinking, he did so many things, and I wanted to just do these 2, train church leaders and fund projects in their areas.
Right.
And he said, "Have you thought about starting your own organization?" Mm. And I said, "Well, I have, but I've been kind of shy to bring it up to you." And he said, "It's time." Mm. So with his blessings and letters and even money, we moved here to Nashville, and from North Carolina, and started African Leadership. And I'd actually set it up when I was in South Africa as a legal entity, but a South African entity with South Africans running it.
Right.
And so then because I didn't know that I was going to do it full time, and so when JL said, "No, just do that," so we started African Leadership here as a legal entity in 2000, and I stayed with them until 2010. But for that one class in Nairobi, to 10 years later, we had about 4,000 students.
Wow.
In about 10 countries.
Well, that's some big numbers, and I know it gets a lot bigger. Even.
It does, yeah.
But what you said about JL there makes a big point. Even in ministry, unfortunately, we tend to kind of build our own little kingdom sometimes.
Yeah.
The fact that JL would say, "Hey, it's time for you to go and do that," just speaks to the kind of person he was, and that he was not about building his thing. He's about doing the work of God, and he saw that you had a passion for doing something that was a little bit different. So there, you were in the African Leadership, and then ultimately that led today to Leadership International that you founded. Tell us a little bit about that transition, getting into that, and specifically what you are doing in Leadership International.
Okay, well that when I was with my friend JL, before the name was changed to Feed the Hunger, it used to be called New Directions. Okay. And I never liked that name because if that doesn't say anything to what we do. But then after I worked with him, I thought this is a perfect name for him, because every morning he wakes up and says, "God, what new direction do you want me to go in?" And so that was wearing me out. We go to India, we go to Africa, we go in a prison in the U.S. And so I said, I really want to be about Africa. And I really want to be about training church leaders. So with his blessing, we started African Leadership. And from the 3,000 students that we had, by by 2010, we had 13,000 students. These are men who are leading local churches, but they're going 2 nights a week, 6 hours a week for 2 years to go through. This is not a weekend study.
Right,
It's
yeah.
500 classroom hours. And we had 50,000 graduates in Africa. And so that's when I started thinking, if this is good for Africa, why not take it all over the world?
Right.
And then we started having these alumni conferences. We go to different countries to get the people that had graduated, and they always ask at the graduation, so what next?
Mm-hmm.
Well, all we had was this one certificate in biblical training. And so I said, we told you this is what we think you need to know to pastor a local church. That's what our training was.
Mm-hmm.
Now you tell us, what do you want to learn, and we'll see if we can find curriculum. And all around consistently they said, we want to learn to lead like Jesus. And your ministry is called African Leadership, but you really didn't teach us much about leadership. And they were right. So I started African Leadership for 2 reasons. First, because they wanted to know about leadership. And second, because I wanted to be in a position where we could go anywhere in the world.
So you started Leadership International for that
Sorry.
reason.
Yes,
Yeah,
started Leadership
you
International.
transitioned from one to the other because you
That's
wanted
right.
a broader
That's right.
view, and yeah.
That's exactly right. So Leadership International still exists, and they train church leaders in Africa. We do too, but our growth is outside of Africa. It's in Nepal or Bhutan, or we're getting our. What we have is we put together another 10 courses. So we have the 10 courses on biblical training. And now when they graduate, they can go to 10 more courses and get a certificate in Christian leadership. And so we now have 20 courses, and men come. People say, how do you qualify for this? You know, what's your academic background need to be, and all that. Well, in Titus and Timothy, it makes clear what the qualifications are to be a deacon or an elder. That's a church leader.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In fact, it says in 1 Timothy 3, he who desires to be an overseer has set his heart on a noble task.
Mm-hmm.
That's the people we seek to serve. And then it says they must be able to teach. Well, how can you teach if you haven't been taught?
Right.
So that's a summary of what we do. We train church leaders in their local community, and all of our teachers are nationals. Now, I was a missionary for 12 years. I'm all for missionaries.
Right.
But we also, I suggest to young missionaries, you should have an exit plan. When will you know you should leave? Can you be training others while you're there to do what you're doing?
Right.
And so we found it didn't take long to find that there are Bible colleges, whether it's in India or Indonesia. There are Bible colleges, and if we offer a curriculum to a Bible college graduate, he's excited to get to share that and have his own Bible school right in his own church.
Right. Right.
And he opens it up to people who are never going to get to go to Bible school like he did.
Right.
Either his denomination paid or, somehow. But the growing church around the world is a lot through independent Bible churches, and they just don't have the opportunity for training. That's what we do.
Right.
And
So the national part of it, I mean, tell us a little bit more about why that's so important, because it seems to me like the sustainable model, actually.
Yes.
Just looking at it from a totally objective standpoint, how does that work? I mean, because I know you work in a lot of low-income areas.
Yes. Yeah.
These guys don't have a lot of money to do this. Can you give us a few more details on maybe specifically why you focus on the nationals exclusively, and then how that works in those low-income areas?
Okay. Well, the way it works is as we grew around Africa, and now as we're finishing the Spanish translation, we will grow in South America the same way we grew in Africa. And what we do is every country has something like an evangelical council of Ghana or of Venezuela. It's wherever there's a lot of Christians, they have these pastors groups.
Right.
And so we can usually get invited to come, and we come and say we have a tool. We're just offering a training tool.
Right.
And we describe it as this something you think would be helpful to the body of Christ here. And invariably they say yes. Very few of us got to go to Bible college.
Right.
If we could use this in the rural areas, or we could use it in the low-income areas. So then they say, how would that work? And I say, well, if you'd invite someone on our staff to come, and we'll do a pastor's conference.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we usually do is we'll like teach one manual. But when our staff person goes, he's not only trying to teach them, like say a doctrine survey or a topic on spiritual leadership. He's looking for teachers.
Mm.
And so then they've experienced it, and then we make the curriculum available, and so then they take it to their local churches.
And there's no better way to learn it than to teach it.
Yeah.
To reinforce it,
Exactly.
what you have learned once you've been
Exactly.
through the program, is then to teach it to somebody else.
And so it's for a growth reason we use the national, but there are many other reasons. The reason we want to train through the nationals, first is they know the language. They don't need to go off to language school for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Second, they know the culture. There are cultural things that it takes years, and I know from experience, for a missionary to get, and he may never get it.
Right.
They know the community. And even when they're teaching our material, they can contextualize it
Mm-hmm.
in a way that someone from the outside couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So, and finally, I'd say it talk about sustainable. You know, if the average missionary costs $50,000 a year, or probably more than that, the teachers are happy to teach for about $5 a month.
Wow.
Our curriculum, we don't give it away. We
Mm-hmm.
think if people value it more. So if they pay $10 a month, and the price varies depending on the area,
Mm-hmm.
because we're basically providing the material free.
Right.
But we want the student to pay.
Gives them some
Yeah.
skin in the game, so
Exactly,
to speak.
exactly,
And
yeah.
anything you pay for
You
is
value
more valuable to
exactly.
you. Yes.
And so what we found is, and we let the nationals, they know the economy. We let them decide what it ought to cost.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't want anybody to not be able to go because they can't afford it.
Right.
Almost any place in the world, somebody that says they want to be a leader, he'd come up with $5 a month.
Right.
And
Right.
that money, half of it's put back to print the next curriculum. The other half goes to the teacher.
Hmm.
And they're happy with that. So
Right.
it's inexpensive. Even our staff, we have national directors in 20 countries.
Mm-hmm.
These guys, they've got 10 to 20 years of ministry experience. They speak 3 to 5 languages.
Wow.
And they're willing to work for $5,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
So businessmen love that. What if your
Right.
staff,
Oh yeah.
So it's sustainable, it's economical,
Mm-hmm.
and we think it's practical.
Well, and it's getting the leadership the information they need to be actually able
Yeah.
to lead churches and
Yeah.
lead other people.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a long time in several different ministries. What are some things that you've seen God do through your work that really was God working? That was beyond what you could have done through human effort.
Yeah, that's a great question. It hit me early on when we had tremendous growth because when I was in business, one of my jobs was I was a recruiter and a sales trainer.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I was a pretty good recruiter.
Right.
But if you look and see who are the national directors, we have just one person in each country that's the national. If you look and saw who they were, you'd realize Larry's not that good. Okay? God brought these people.
Right.
I mean, we started our training centers in South Africa in the late 90s. And I went to a pastor's conference looking for people that might teach.
Mm-hmm.
And the only one that was interested was a guy that told me he was from Ghana. And he had to leave Ghana to come to South Africa so he could get Bible college training because there was no opportunity for him in Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
He took our training, went back to Ghana. I was on the phone with him this morning. He's
Wow.
been with me ever since. There are probably 20,000 people who've been through training all over West Africa, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Ghana,
Mm-hmm.
because of how the Lord used Samuel Pong.
Wow.
God brought him from Ghana to South Africa
Right.
when I happened to be there, and he only lived a couple miles from me. And I could go down the list of how the Lord brought people
Mm-hmm.
to build this team, and I'd say that's the first God thing. I couldn't have done it.
Mm-hmm.
And second, the growth that came, because this thing about, I said there's an evangelical council of churches in all these countries.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't know that. They all knew it. and I didn't go to those meetings.
Right.
They went to those meetings.
Right.
So the Lord grew it. and he staffed it, and I got to watch it happen.
Mm.
I'd say the second thing is in some ways very different, and I did, like I said, my brother was killed in an accident on the way to a ministry, like a local missions trip. He was going from Roanoke, Virginia, into the mountains of West Virginia,
Mm-hmm.
helping the poorest of the poor in the U.S., and he was killed. Mm. So just because you're doing God's will doesn't mean you're always protected.
Sure.
But I say that to also say the Lord has protected our family. Now, one of these days, we're all going to die. And
sure.
But we have, when we were living in South Africa, that was during the apartheid years before Mandela was elected, and there was a lot of violence, mm-hmm. and our own church was attacked. And I was there. And when guys came in and opened fire with AK-47s, and then threw grenades into the congregation.
Wow!
And the Lord protected us the pew we always sat in. I don't know if I like when you go to church, but I usually sit about the same place.
Everybody has their pew.
Yeah, that's right.
That's just
right.
the way we are. We're creatures of habit.
Yeah. So the night of the attack. We just found out Mary was pregnant with our third son.
Wow.
She didn't feel good, but I already had all the kids in the car and getting ready to go. And then she says, "I don't feel good. I don't think I want to go." My two other kids, being good missionary kids, said, "Well, we don't want to go either." So
kids are the same all around the world.
Yeah. So by the time I got them out of the car and Mary back in the car, and then I'm going to church, I'm late. And because I was late, and because it was tense in the city, once the church started, they locked all the doors, except one at the back and one at the front. It's a big church. Mm-hmm. And so I had to go in the back, and so I had to sit in a different place. Well, the people that sat on the pew where we always sat, they were killed. A grenade landed there. And that's only the Lord. I don't know why I've been spared. Someday I won't be.
Right.
And there are a lot of other situations. When we lived in Kenya, we moved back to Kenya when I started Leadership International, and our last son wanted to go to high school there, and we were walking to a village, 4 of the 6 people in my family, where we wanted to start some ministry just on a Saturday afternoon, just walking on a trail with other Kenyans, and we were kidnapped. And like the other story, it's a long story, but here we are. We all survived, and we were kidnapped at gunpoint by 3 people. And 4 hours later, it was all over. But it was traumatic.
I was going to say that's got to be a pretty traumatic situation.
Yeah. So that I would say just the Lord's supernatural protection. Mm-hmm. We got, I told you we do relief efforts, and back in the Darfur crisis, some people remember, in the Sudan.
Yeah.
We were raising money here and loading planes to send in to areas where even the Red Cross didn't go. And we got stranded. Because when those relief planes go, they go and they drop the stuff and unload, and they're out of there.
Right.
Because it's not a safe place.
Right.
But some of us wanted to stay and get to know the people and have a plane come back in a couple of days, and it didn't. So the Lord's provision in those kind of circumstances, obviously, is totally out of our control. God has shown up in growth, in finances provided, and protection in ways that I never dreamed of.
Right. Well, and to your point on those stories, I mean, it's you can give your perspective on it, but it's hard to think about the fact that I normally sat in that pew where that grenade landed.
Yes, yeah.
And we don't understand those things. We don't understand why your brother was killed.
Yeah,
when he was
those are mysteries of God.
Only God understands those things. We just have to think that the only reason I'm still here is something else He's got for me to do.
That.
Right.
Amen. That was my conclusion. It's still my conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when I get discouraged, I think, well, if he was finished with me,
Mm-hmm.
then I'll be out of here.
Right.
And I look forward to that.
Mm-hmm.
But since I'm still here,
Right.
he must have, what is it? He who began a good work in me will be faithful to complete it, and it must not be completed.
That's right.
And we are God's workmanship,
Right.
created in Christ Jesus to do the good works He's prepared in advance for us to do.
Mm-hmm.
And coming back to some of those earlier questions, that's what I tell young people about knowing and doing God's will. I say, think about the times in your life where you found yourself, whatever it was you were doing, and you thought, I was built for this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's usually something you enjoyed.
Right. Right.
And I would say in ministry, missions is undersold. It's a great adventure.
Right.
It's thrilling. It's like,
Yeah.
it's not, oh no, I got to
It's not, oh no, God's telling me to go to Africa. It should be, oh wow, God's telling me to go to Africa. What an adventure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's but that was exactly my conclusion.
Mm.
It doesn't make any sense that one night we didn't sit there.
Right.
And those people died.
Sure.
So it's or my brother's death. It would have made a lot more sense to me for him to stay. He had all this training.
Right.
And but God's ways are not our ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, all that makes me wonder about how we currently approach missions in the U.S. What are we doing in our churches to promote missions? Because it is, I mean, honestly, and I've talked about this with some other missionary guests that I've had, is, it's kind of a joke in Christian circles of like, God don't send me to Africa.
Yeah, yeah. Scott Wesley Brown, who I know pretty well, he wrote that song. Please don't send me to Africa, and he got a chance to sing it with me when he was in Africa. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So what do we need to be doing in churches? You mentioned having the missional classes earlier.
Yeah.
How should we be dealing with missions in a local church?
Well, that's a question that church leaders need to keep asking. Mm-hmm. And I think we put too much of a burden on the pastor or the pastors. Mm-hmm. Yes, they should be asking us, but we're all. We believe in the priesthood of all believers.
Right.
And so we need to not let it be, we need to be coming to the other leaders saying, I guess the best way I've heard it is when we were in grad school out in California, we were told, the chaplain of our school was a famous retired missionary named David Adeney. And my pastor here, Scotty Smith, said, when you get to Berkeley, find out where David Adeney lives and show up at 6:30 on Tuesdays. He has an open Bible study. And we did. Mm-hmm. Dr. David Adeney came out every day and every morning, and he had a Bible in one hand and he had a newspaper in the other. Mm. And he said, this is what missions is about. We should be thinking of ourselves as a world Christian. Mm. And so first we look at God's Word. What does the Word say? And second, we say, what are the needs of the world? Mm-hmm. And the rest of our life, we should be integrating those two things. Right. The Word of God and the needs of the world. Right. And so I think that if we wouldn't even think of it like missions, right. It's like this is normal Christian living.
Exactly. That's exactly that's what we're trying to
take it out of the category of missions.
Yeah. Quit drawing lines between everything.
Exactly.
Quit
full-time ministry and part-time ministry. Well, we're all full-time.
Right.
And a world Christian, as I've thought it through for these 30 years, mm-hmm. integrates the Word and the world into his priorities, mm-hmm. of his thinking, mm-hmm. of his relationships, his work, and his money. Mm. And you start doing that, then churches start changing. Mm. And they become intentionally integrated, because there's most people listening to this today are going to good churches that believe in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, see, what does the Bible say? What was Jesus' last commandment? There's something significant that he said, go and make disciples of all nations.
Mm-hmm.
And Matthew 25, and in Matthew 24, he says, and then the end will come, but not before.
Mm-hmm.
The word has gone to all the world. So we are on a mission. And so let's, as you said about prayer, let's do it and not just talk about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Now I could get into all kind of details of what it looks like in a church, but main thing is just read what, and Jesus said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments.
Mm-hmm. So those, I think you named 4 things there that we need to integrate. Repeat those again. Those are worth hearing again.
Okay,
because,
okay.
I mean, you're singing off my sheet of music.
Oh, good. Oh, good. I was hoping we'd sing a little bit, but that if we integrate what the Word says
Mm-hmm.
and the needs of the world in our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Romans 12 says, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Right. Right.
If we put those together, integrate in our thinking, then in our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is our family.
Right.
And then our work.
Mm-hmm.
And then our money.
Right. Bring it all together.
Bring it all together.
Bring it all together, and then that's going to change. If we did that, that would change the face of Christianity in the U.S., which would then change the face of it around the world.
And you and I both know individuals. Now thinking of that definition of a world Christian,
Mm-hmm.
you know some.
Mm-hmm.
There are people living that way.
Right.
And I would say you want to do things to influence your church, but don't wait for your church.
Mm.
And I think for me, when I read that, 6 groups, Jesus said, if you minister to the least of the
Right.
brothers, you minister to
Right.
me. Well, if that came, I read the word. You can respond to the word. It doesn't have to come from the pulpit. It doesn't have to be your church's program.
Right.
I'm not against that.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
We work with churches. But take your own relationship with the Lord as the most serious thing and start acting like it, acting like a world Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And
Not a worldly Christian, but a world Christian.
good distinction. Yeah, good distinction.
Very
yeah,
good.
Yeah.
So Larry, I mean, it's been a great conversation. I have enjoyed just hearing about the work that's been done over the years. Just many things that have challenged me, even if we're sitting here talking. But tell us more about, if somebody wants to get involved specifically with your ministry, what you're doing. How do they do that? How do they connect with you?
Best way for viewers would be just go to our website, leadershipinternational.org.
Okay.
And there there's a short video that give you a summary of what we do, but we have prayer requests on there, and we're working in difficult places around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So to pray, and to give financially. First, we want you to really understand what we do. So I'd say there's an address there where you can write with questions, or you can give us your address and we can send you material. But the website gives a pretty clear description. And then here in the U.S., this is our financial base. This is our fundraising office. And so I'd just encourage you to think and pray through how you might want to be a part of it. It's a Great Commission ministry. We're taking the gospel, we're making disciples in about 20 different countries through nationals, and it's very inexpensive, the curriculum. You can pay for a man to go through all of our training for $100. If you want to start what we call a Biblical Leadership Training Center, BLTC. Mm-hmm. We start them all over the world. We've got about 300 of them. Mm-hmm. $2,500, it's 25 people through all that training. Hmm. And so if you give $100, that's one.
Right.
And the second thing is in terms of giving, is there are relief efforts. I mentioned that I got involved in Africa with a famine in Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't know that for the last 2 years there's been a war and a drought in Ethiopia again. Mm. Last year, 2 million people were displaced in Ethiopia because of a civil war, a place called Tigray, and their fight against the government of Ethiopia. And so we provide supplies for refugees. And we did in South Sudan last year and in Madagascar where there was a terrible drought. So you'll see the different things that you could fund. $10 gives blankets and food to a family that'll provide for them for a month in war-torn areas. Now in Ukraine, people are asking, what can we do about that?
Right.
And so we have a partnership with a church in Romania. And so we've already been sending funds there to help that church feed these people and even renovate a part of the church so they could take in more. And just this morning, we committed $10,000 to load up a truck in Romania that will go back to Ukraine to take food to people in Ukraine. So there are things that you can do. And we're actually sending a team there in about 2 weeks. So
yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
will be there,
obviously, we can get on the website, we can give, provide financial support, we can pray. What about that doing part that we talked about? Is there a way that through your organization, I know there are other organizations, but is there a way, if somebody said, I just really I want to be on that team going to Ukraine or somewhere else, is there a way for people to get involved that way? Yeah,
there is. And so we have mission trips. They were cut down a lot the last year because of COVID, but they're opened up. We have teams going to Tanzania and Ghana this year. This is not about refugees. This is about you can go and teach, or you can get involved in a development project. We built high schools in Madagascar. We have a team going in June, and we build daycare centers in South Africa. So there are a lot of opportunities to go this year, and I'd encourage you to look at that too. But Ukraine, you can go, but it's pretty selective now. It's a war, and absolutely. So you have to have pretty particular skills. We have someone that's done refugee resettlement before, and trauma counseling, and there'll be other things coming. But that's but there are a lot of other trips.
Well, everybody's going to want to go to Ukraine because that's what's in the news right now. But there's a lot of opportunities, and unfortunately, there's a lot of hurting people around the world that are not on the evening news.
That's what I'm saying about Ethiopia. The people don't know about that, and we've been given there for a year.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we hope people will go and check out the website, check out the materials. I've looked through your materials. I've saw the 20 courses, solid stuff that you're teaching people. So hopefully people will go and check that stuff out. I want to come back to your title of Chief Storyteller. The one that when I was first introduced to you through Kyle, our mutual friend, Kyle said, Larry's got 1,000 stories. So you're the chief storyteller. Maybe let's just wind up if you've got a good story for us, something you can share with us.
Yeah, well, great. I was just sitting here thinking of, there's so many, but I'm gonna say one real short one because it relates to things only God could do.
Right.
A friend of mine asked me to go to Madagascar. It's the big island over in the Indian Ocean. And I'd been to most of the countries in Africa, but I'd never been to Madagascar. And I said no. And he's our ministry partner in South Africa. And year after year he kept asking me, he said, I know why you don't want to go. And I said, why? He said, because you're afraid. I said, what do you think I'm afraid of? He said, you're afraid that God will call you to do something there. And I said, that might be it, because I'm pretty busy. I said, when you find an opportunity for training church leaders there, then I'll go. So he calls me not too long after, and said, not only do I have a denomination that would like to use your training, but we're going pretty soon. And so we went, and we had my wife went, and there were 106 people that wanted to go through those courses. What I didn't know was this local church in the capital city had decided this is our school of missions. And this comes back to what a local church can do. This is a local church in one of the poorest countries in the world. They're in the bottom 5, Madagascar. Wow. And they decided, because they had done a study and found there are 200 villages in Madagascar where there was no church. And so they asked their people to volunteer to be missionaries, that the church would send them out to their own people. Right. But they needed some training. That's who we were teaching.
Wow.
Well, not all. What we didn't know was that they were going to be going pretty soon, and they even had to go a few times for short-term trips before they moved to these villages. And they came back within a year and had stories of 4 areas where they found the Bible had never been translated into their local language. So they asked, would we help? Frankly, I've been doing this a long time.
Right.
I got a good friend that's with Wycliffe Bible Translation. I thought, nah, that's not true. Certainly, there aren't 4, languages.
Right.
So I called my friend at Wycliffe. I said, what do you know about the Tishominti language? He said, oh, it's out of Madagascar. I said, what about Bastilio? Yeah, that's another one. I said, between those 2 groups, there's 1 million people that speak that language. And they say the Bible's never been translated. That's not true, is it? He said, it is true. So what's happened in the last year is people from that church, there were many that didn't know that language, and working with other linguistics experts, they have translated the whole Bible in Bastilio.
Wow.
And we had it printed in Korea. It left this month on a ship, and it'll be in Madagascar next month.
Wow. How many were you able to print?
We printed 10,000, and the amazing thing is all the work was done by local people from a local church. We just paid for it.
Right.
And so before it was even finished, they wanted to start evangelizing. So we had the book of John. They started playing it on the radio broadcasting into these areas. And they would read a different chapter. They read the whole book of John, a different chapter every day. And then they went around house to house, invited people to come to a meeting. And thousands of people showed up. And people came to Christ. And one of the people on the team asked someone who just come to Christ, why did you even come to this? He said, because I heard on the radio God speaking my language.
Wow.
That's one of my favorite stories. I had no idea I'd ever be involved at all in Bible translation.
And you didn't even want to go to Madagascar.
No, I didn't want to go to Madagascar. And I've 40 years in ministry, I've never been involved in translations. That's the way the Lord, He's looking for, the available. And then he shows up.
Wow.
Let me give you a glimpse of one other story.
Okay, yeah.
That's about the training church leaders and the influence it can have on thousands of people.
Absolutely.
Even though we didn't know what God.
Yeah, I mean, you open a door, you don't know what's on the other side of it. Yeah.
And as long as you're about God's word, He says, "My word will not come back void, but it will accomplish its purposes."
Right.
We're a Christian education organization. And we also sponsor kids in elementary schools, even daycare centers. But I told you that we were kidnapped in Kenya. And we were on the way to a village, walking from our house to a village called Huruma. And we never got there that day. But 2 years later, I got there another way in my car. And found a lady that had a little adult education program. And after getting to know her, she said, the kids here don't even go to high school. There's no high school around here. Some of them finish 8th grade, but nobody goes to high school because they can't afford it. So again, long story short, some people in Nashville here helped me, and we built a high school. It was made out of shipping containers.
Wow.
I have to show you a picture sometimes. It's a beautiful building. It's amazing what you can do with shipping containers. And at the very first graduation, Mary and I were living there, and these kids were just going to high school, and they invited us to come to the graduation, and so we decided we'd give them all as a graduation present. After they got their diploma, we'd give them a Bible. It was a Christian school, but a lot of them still didn't have a Bible. And kind of as a last minute thing, Mary's writing a little card to the 32 graduates.
Right.
And I said, let's put some money in that envelope. 1,000 shillings is $10 US. So I put 1,000 shilling note, they call it, like a $10 bill.
Right.
And I didn't think anything else about it. We gave it to them. About a year later, the headmaster of that school called me and said, have you heard what happened to John Wanjaru? I didn't know. I thought maybe he got killed. I didn't know. No, I haven't had any contact with him. She said, would you be willing to meet with him? I said, sure. She said, let's pick a place. And I picked a place. She called him. He comes up in a taxi cab, steps out in a suit, and walks over and has lunch with me. And I said, well, the headmaster says I should ask what's been happening to you. He said, well, it's just the Lord, and but I do want to thank you for the gift of the 1,000 shillings. Can I tell you how the Lord used that? I said, yeah. He said, I didn't even know it was in that Bible. I had my diploma in my Bible, and I walked back home about 6 miles. And then when I got home, I opened it, and I saw the envelope and the card. And when I pulled that out, he said, I never held that much money in my hand in my life. $10. He is raised by a single mother, 8 siblings. And he said, so I knew this was a gift from God. I'd worked, I'd had jobs, but this was a gift. So he said, for the next 3 days, I kept it in my pocket, and I walked around my village, and I prayed, God, how would you have me use this $10? Because I believe it's for my future. And he talked to the guy repairing bicycles, and he talked to the people selling vegetables on the side of the street. He talked to the guy repairing shoes. But he said, I kept kind of being drawn back to this guy that was selling eggs. And I started asking him a lot of questions about his business. Finally he said, well, I could use some help. And he said, well, I'd rather not work for you. I'd like to work with you. How many eggs can I buy for 1,000 shillings? And he bought trays. And the guy said, I'll sell them to you at this price. I suggest you sell them at this price. The only condition is you got to go sell them on the other side of the village. And he started with that. He doubled his money the first day.
Wow.
And then he did more and more. And then he got to go meet the people at the farm. He started getting it directly. By then he had to buy a bicycle. You can't ride with eggs on your bike. But he said, I would push my bicycle loaded with crates of eggs.
Wow.
Until he got to the point that he got 4 other guys and bought them bicycles. And then he started renting a taxi cab that he would go down there, and besides those 4 guys, he'd get a whole taxi cab full of eggs and go to another village. By the time I met John, he said, at the restaurant, he said, and now I have a shop. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, we sell all kind of stuff, but we do sell eggs. And I still have these 4 guys selling eggs over there.
Right.
And he said, do you remember my brother Peter? I said, yeah. He graduated with you. He said, yeah. He's a couple of years younger, but we graduated at the same time because I didn't go to school for 2 years after elementary school. And then we heard about the New Dawn Academy, and so we came together. Well, he's in university. I said, really? He said, yeah, I'm paying for him to go to school.
Wow.
He said, I'm married too. Would you like to meet my wife? I said, sure. I gave him a ride back to the shop. I met his wife. And she said, oh, have you told him about your brother? I said, yeah, I told him in school. Fast forward to the end of the story. John put his brother all the way through school. He's a surgeon at the Nairobi General Hospital now.
Wow.
He put 2 more of his brothers through school. One is in medical school now. One as an engineer. And he still has that one shop. Then he got a place downtown. He's basically a wholesaler. And last year, he got an opportunity to come to the U.S. to go to college himself. And if he told this story, every other phrase would be, and then God provided. And then God provided this, and then God provided that. That is one of my favorite stories.
Wow, that is a tremendous story of what God can do with $10.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you just, our minds really can't wrap around what that $10 can do.
Yeah.
So, wow, that's a great God story there, far-reaching effects. That'd be a good place to wind up right there. Larry, we really appreciate you taking the time. It's been a joy to sit down and talk with you. I know that people are going to enjoy listening to what we have discussed today, and I hope will log on, get on to your website, check out the ministry, get involved, and just see what God will do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.